Was geht ab, meine Damen und Herren? Ich hoffe, euch geht's gut. Heute wollte ich einen kleinen Pause machen von meinen normalen Videos mit den Artikeln und so. Und in diesem Video würde ich euch gerne einen kleinen Unterricht erteilen. Und zwar über den Imperativ. Now, what is the imperative form, you might be asking? Well, that's just a fancy word for commands. How do you make commands in German? How do you tell someone to do something? Not ask them to do something, but tell them. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty here, it's important to remember that German, like many other languages, has both a formal and an informal way of addressing someone. Just as a refresher, the formal way to address someone is by using the pronoun Sie. So this would be used to address, for example, a stranger, maybe a work colleague, pretty much anyone who you don't have a super close relationship with. And this pronoun can be used to address both a single person or multiple people. And then, of course, we have the informal pronoun du. So this is what you would use to address your friends, your family members. You usually use du when addressing children, even if they're not your own children and you don't even know them. You know, you would never refer to a child as sie. That would sound extremely weird. You know, there's a few other one-off exceptions, like deities, for example. You would never refer to God as sie. You would always refer to God as du. So there's some exceptions, but in general, those are the rules. Now, why am I bringing this up? Well, because we have a formal and an informal way of addressing someone, these pronouns sie and du have different verb conjugations, which in turn will lead to different ways of expressing commands. So, I'm going to put some example sentences down below. These are just plain present tense sentences, nothing fancy. You know, you've got your subject, your verb, and your direct or indirect object. Now, let's look at the first sentence. Du gibst ihr die Blumen. You give her the flowers, or you are giving her the flowers. So, if I wanted to turn this into a command, if I wanted to say, not you are giving her the flowers, but give her the flowers, what would I have to change about this sentence? Well, first and foremost, I have to change the verb, right? Now, a few things about this sentence are going to stay the same. The two things that are going to stay the same are the direct and indirect object. Now, remember, the direct object of a sentence is the entity that is receiving the verb, so to speak. So in this sentence, our verb is geben, du gibst ihr die Blumen. Geben, to give. So to identify the direct object, you have to ask yourself, who or what is being given? Was wird hier gegeben? Well, the flowers are being given. So the flowers, die Blumen, that is our direct object, and it will not change in the command form. Our indirect object here is also going to remain the same. The indirect object in this sentence is ihr. The flowers are being given to her. Du gibst ihr die Blumen, this wonderful mystery woman. So that is going to stay the same as well. Now, the subject of this sentence, du, is going to disappear in the imperative form because it's already implied by the command itself that you're addressing this person. So you don't need to explicitly use that second person pronoun. Sometimes people leave it in there, but for the most part, you can completely omit it. Now, on to the most fun part, the verb conjugation. So in general, just like other verb tenses in German, most verbs in the imperative generally take a similar pattern. Of course, like pretty much every other rule in German, there are exceptions. Es gibt ja immer Ausnahmen von diesen Sprachregeln. So here is a breakdown of how this verb geben is conjugated in the imperative. Now, the first thing you might notice is that in the imperative, the verb is preceding the pronoun. So that's the first feature of the imperative form. The verb comes before the pronoun. As you can see in the first example, they have du in parentheses because generally you don't need to include the pronoun when you're using du. So when you're addressing a singular person in the informal, you don't need to include the pronoun. So if I wanted to say, give her the flowers, I would say, gib ihr die Blumen. Gib ihr die Blumen. Give her the flowers. Now what's happened here? All we did was remove the st from the end of our first person present tense conjugation, gibst. Du gibst ihr. You are giving here. You are giving her, rather. So if you want to make it a command, you say, gib ihr die Blumen. Gib ihr die Blumen. Now, what does this look like with plural pronouns, like we? Let's look at the second example sentence. Wir gehen zur Schule. We are going to school. Wir gehen zur Schule. So in this case, to make this a command, all you would do is change the placement of the verb, namely putting it in front of the subject. So the command form of this sentence would be, gehen wir zur Schule. Gehen wir zur Schule. Let's go to school. Gehen wir. Now notice, this is the same form that's used with the second person formal pronoun Sie. So let's take our example sentence. Herr Müller, Sie sprechen ganz leise. Mr. Müller, you're talking very quietly. So if we want to turn this sentence into a command, we would say, Herr Müller, sprechen Sie etwas lauter bitte. Sprechen Sie. Speak a little louder, please. Sprechen Sie etwas lauter. Again, we're just bringing the verb to the front, but we are keeping this formal pronoun Sie in our sentence. Like I said, with du, you don't have to retain the pronoun, but with the formal and the plural pronoun, we do retain the pronoun. It just comes directly after the verb. Now, what about the second person plural pronoun ihr, meaning you all or you guys? So this is our original sentence, ihr kauft eine Pizza. You guys are buying a pizza. If we want to turn this into a command, we would say, kauft eine Pizza, or kauft euch eine Pizza, which means literally buy yourselves a pizza. Kauft euch eine Pizza. You know, buy a pizza, you guys, or buy yourselves a pizza. So similar to the second person singular pronoun du, you usually omit the second person plural pronoun as well, ihr. Both of these forms are informal. So there you have it. That is the basic form of the imperative conjugation in German. The good news is most verbs will follow this exact pattern. Of course, some verbs will have a slight difference depending on their stem. The stem is basically the main part of the verb that changes ending. So with geben, for example, the stem would be geb, gebe. I'll drop a few more examples here of verb stems. So let's look at another example. So let's look at a few more examples. Du hilfst deiner Mutter. Du hilfst deiner Mutter. Now remember, the verb helfen takes the dative form. So in this sentence, the direct object is Mutter, because that is who is receiving the verb. It's who is being helped. But remember, certain verbs in German, the direct object will be in the dative form. And I actually have a whole video on the different cases, so I will link that somewhere on this screen, so you can check that out. So our example sentence is, du hilfst deiner Mutter. You're helping your mother, or you help your mother. So if I want to turn this into a command, I would say, I would first look at the stem of this verb, which is hilfst, just like we did in the previous one, get rid of the st, and there I have my imperative form of helfen. Hilf deiner Mutter. Help your mom. Hilf deiner Mutter. Let's look at the second one. Ihr esst jeden Morgen Frühstück. Ihr esst jeden Morgen Frühstück. You guys or you all eat breakfast every morning. Now, if I want to turn this into a command, The good news is I don't have to change anything because the present tense form est excuse me is the same as the imperative form, just like we saw here with geben. So all I would do in this case is get rid of ihr and move est to the front. Esst jeden Morgen Frühstück. Esst jeden Morgen Frühstück. You all eat your breakfast every morning. Eat your breakfast every morning, guys. That's kind of what that's saying. Frau Schmidt, Sie nehmen an der Veranstaltung teil. Frau Schmidt, Sie nehmen an der Veranstaltung teil. Mrs. Schmidt, you're participating in the event. So, again, to turn this into a command, we're going to keep the Sie, but we're going to bring the verb nehmen in this form before the pronoun. So, the command form of this would be Frau Schmidt, nehmen Sie an der Veranstaltung teil. Nehmen Sie. Take part in this event. Nehmen Sie. So, as you can see, these follow pretty much the same pattern as before, and that's really all there is to it. Again, this is just a brief overview. Like I said, there are exceptions, there are nuances, but for the most part, that is how you make a command in German. Vielen Dank alle für das Zuschauen und ich werde euch im nächsten Video wiedersehen. Tschüss.